Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a world where the air itself seems to press against your skin, where each breath feels sharper than the last, and where the sea behind you is already beginning to stiffen into something colder, heavier, more permanent. You stand at the edge of a Viking settlement, your boots crunching softly over frost that never quite melts. The longhouse ahead glows faintly, its warmth visible long before you feel it. And as you take that first step forward, you realize something simple and slightly concerning. You probably would not survive this, not without learning very quickly how these families turn cold into something they can live with. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like it, share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always fascinating to see how far these quiet journeys reach. Now dim the lights, you move closer to the longhouse, and with each step, the wind seems to settle into a steady presence rather than a sudden shock. It does not disappear, it simply becomes part of everything. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking age communities in Scandinavia faced winters that could stretch for months with limited daylight and temperatures that made simple survival a daily effort rather than a given. You begin to feel what that means, not as an abstract idea, but as a physical reality. The sky above you holds a pale, almost reluctant light. It is not quite day, not quite night, just something in between, as if the sun itself has decided to keep its distance. You notice how quiet everything is. No birds, no distant movement, just the soft, constant whisper of wind moving across open land. And yet there is life here. You see it in the smoke rising from the longhouse roof, drifting slowly upward before being pulled sideways by the cold air. That smoke is not just a sign of comfort. It is a signal of work, of preparation, of careful planning that began long before you arrived. Historians still debate whether Viking families viewed winter primarily as a threat to be endured or as a predictable cycle that shaped their entire way of life. As you stand here, it feels like both. You reach the doorway and for a moment you hesitate. Not because of fear, but because you sense that stepping inside means stepping into a completely different world. You push the door open, and the first thing that meets you is warmth. Not overwhelming, not soft like modern heating, but present. Real, earned. It wraps around you in a way that feels almost surprising after the cold outside. The air carries the scent of smoke wood, wool, and something cooking slowly over the fire. A lesser-known detail suggests that many Viking longhouses were designed not just for shelter, but to trap and circulate heat efficiently, using thick walls and low ceilings to keep warmth from escaping too quickly. You can feel that design working even now. The interior is dim lit mostly by the central hearth that runs along the middle of the space. Flames move steadily, not wildly, as if they too understand the need for consistency rather than excess. You step further inside. The ground beneath your feet is firm, packed earth. Along the sides of the longhouse raised platforms hold bedding tools and carefully stored belongings. Nothing feels unnecessary. Every object has a purpose. Every space is used. You notice the people next. They do not stop what they are doing to stare at you. There is no dramatic pause, no sudden attention. Instead, they continue their tasks with a quiet awareness of your presence, as if visitors like weather are simply another part of life to be acknowledged, but not disrupted. One person adjusts something near the fire. Another works with wool, their hands moving in a steady rhythm. Someone else checks a bundle of stored food, shifting it slightly, making sure it remains dry, protected, usable. You begin to understand something important. Warmth here is not a single thing. It is not just the fire. It is everything working together. The building, the clothing, the food, the people, even the way they move, conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary effort. There is a quiet coordination to it all. You take a seat along one of the side benches, feeling the solid wood beneath you. It is not soft, but it is stable. And right now, stability feels more valuable than comfort. The heat from the fire reaches you slowly, spreading across your hands, your face, your chest. It does not rush, it builds. And as it does, you notice the sounds inside the longhouse, the crackle of firewood, the soft murmur of voices, the faint rustle of fabric. These are not loud sounds, but together they create something that feels steady, reassuring. You glance back toward the door. The cold is still there. You can almost feel it waiting. A curious detail recorded in some archaeological interpretations hints that doorways were sometimes designed to minimize drafts, often with small entry spaces, or coverings that reduced how much cold air could rush inside at once. It is a simple idea, but standing here it feels like the difference between comfort and constant struggle. You turn back to the fire. A bowl is passed from one person to another, its contents steaming gently. You cannot quite see what is inside, but you can smell it. Something warm, something filling. You realize how important that is. Warmth does not come from one source. It comes from layers, from repeated small efforts, from attention to detail, from habits built over years, passed down and quietly practiced daily. You watch as someone adds another piece of wood to the fire. Not too large, not too small, just enough to keep the flame steady. No one rushes. No one wastes movement. Everything feels measured. Even time itself seems to move differently here, shaped by necessity rather than choice. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle into you more deeply. And for the first time since arriving, you feel something shift. Not comfort exactly, but understanding. You begin to see that surviving this winter is not about fighting the cold. It is about working with it, anticipating it, respecting it. You look around once more at the longhouse, at the people within it, at the fire that sits quietly at the center of everything. This is where it begins, not with grand actions, not with dramatic moments, but with preparation, with small decisions made long before the snow ever fell. And as you sit there listening to the steady rhythm of life inside these walls, you realize that the winter outside is only part of the story. What matters just as much is what happens here, inside, where warmth is not given. It is built, maintained, protected. You shift slightly on the bench, pulling your hands closer to the fire, and without quite noticing when it happens, your breathing begins to match the quiet pace of the room. Slow, even, steady, and as the light from the hearth flickers gently across the wooden beams above you, find yourself settling more fully into this place, ready to understand how every part of it has been shaped by the long, unyielding cold that waits just beyond the walls. You remain seated for a moment, letting the warmth settle more deeply into your hands, your shoulders, your breathing. But slowly your attention begins to drift outward again, not toward the cold beyond the walls, but toward the structure that stands between you and it, the longhouse itself. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking longhouses were built using timber frames, combined with turf wattle and daub, forming thick insulating walls that could hold heat far more effectively than you might expect from such simple materials. As you look around now, you begin to see that this place is not just shelter, it's a carefully constructed response to winter. You rise from the bench, moving slowly along the edge of the room. The air changes slightly as you step away from the fire. Not cold, but cooler, enough to remind you that warmth here is not evenly distributed. It gathers, concentrates, and fades in predictable patterns. You reach out and touch the wall. It feels solid, not smooth like modern surfaces, but layered, textured. Beneath your fingers, you can sense the packed earth and organic materials that have been pressed together over time. Turf cut from the ground itself still holds traces of the land it came from. A lesser-known detail suggests that some longhouses were partially dug into the ground or built with earth, banked up along the outer walls, creating an additional barrier against the wind and helping to stabilize indoor temperatures during harsh weather. Standing here, that detail feels less like a curiosity and more like quiet brilliance. You notice how low the ceiling feels compared to what you might expect. At first, it seems almost restrictive, but then you understand. Lower space means less air to heat, less space for warmth to escape. Even the shape of the building works in favor of survival. Historians still argue whether the design of longhouses evolved primarily through deliberate planning or through generations of gradual adaptation to climate and available resources. As you walk slowly beneath the heavy beams, it feels like the answer may not matter. What matters is that it works. You pause near one of the support posts, The wood is thick, worn smooth in places where hands have passed over it again and again. It carries the subtle scent of smoke that has settled into it over time, layer upon layer, year after year. Nothing here is untouched by the fire. You tilt your head slightly, looking upward. The roof slopes gently, its inner surface darkened by soot. Small openings near the top allow smoke to escape, but not too quickly. The smoke lingers just enough to warm the air before drifting out. It is not perfect. Your eyes sting slightly if you focus too long, but it is balanced. Carefully, you take a few steps toward the center again, noticing how the floor dips slightly near the hearth. Ash has settled there over time, mixing with the earth beneath. Every part of this space shows signs of use, of repetition, of life lived not in comfort but in consistency. You pass by a small storage area along the wall. Bundles are stacked neatly. Cloth tools, food supplies, all kept close but not crowded. The placement feels intentional, not just for convenience but for preservation. Away from drafts, away from damp, close enough to the warmth to prevent freezing. You begin to see how the entire longhouse is arranged like a system. Each part supports the others. Each choice reduces risk. A curious archaeological observation notes that longhouses often housed both people and animals under the same roof with livestock kept at one end of the structure. While it might sound unpleasant to modern sensibilities, this arrangement provided additional warmth during winter months, as the body heat of animals contributed to the overall temperature inside. You glance toward the far end of the building. There is movement there, subtle, a shift of shape. The quiet presence of animals. You do not move closer yet, but you feel it. The shared space, the shared warmth. It is not about separation here. It is about survival. You return your attention to the walls, to the beams, to the roof above you. You begin to notice the absence of certain things. No large windows, no open spaces for light to flood in. At first it might feel limiting, but then you remember the wind outside, the cold. Every opening is a weakness. Every gap is an invitation for heat to leave, and here nothing is left open without purpose. You walk slowly toward the doorway again, stopping just short of it. You can feel the difference in the air. A faint current, a reminder of what waits outside. You do not open the door. You do not need to. You already understand. A small design choice, barely noticeable, now feels significant. The entrance is slightly offset, not aligned directly with the central space. It reduces the direct flow of cold air into the living area when the door is opened. Simple, quiet, effective. You step back once more, returning to the center of the longhouse. The fire continues to burn steadily. The people continue their work. Nothing dramatic changes, and yet your understanding deepens. This place is not built for comfort in the way you might imagine. It is built for endurance. For stability. For holding on to warmth long enough to outlast the cold. You sit down again on the bench, this time with a different awareness. You feel the wall behind you, the structure around you, the way the heat gathers and stays not by accident but by design. You realize something subtle. The longhouse does not fight winter directly. It reduces its impact. It limits its reach. It creates a smaller world where warmth can exist, even if only just enough. You watch as someone near the fire adjusts a piece of wood, shifting it slightly to maintain the balance of the flame. Even the fire depends on the house, and the house depends on the fire, and both depend on the people who understand how to keep them working together. You lean forward slightly, resting your elbows on your knees, letting your hands hover near the heat once more. Outside the winter continues, unchanged, unmoved. But inside, within these thick walls of earth and timber, something steady holds. Not perfect warmth, not constant comfort, but enough. And here enough is everything. You sit close enough to the hearth now that you can feel its presence without thinking about it. The warmth is no longer something you reach for. It has become part of the background, steady and constant, like the quiet rhythm of breathing in the room around you. The fire draws your attention without asking for it. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that the central hearth in a Viking longhouse was the primary source of heat, light and cooking, making it the most important feature of the home during winter months. As you watch the flames move, you begin to understand that this is not just a fire. It is the center of everything. You lean slightly forward, studying how it burns. The wood is arranged carefully, not stacked in a chaotic pile, but placed with intention, allowing air to move between each piece. The flames do not roar, they do not flare wildly. They remain controlled, almost patient. Someone nearby shifts a log with a simple wooden tool, a small adjustment, but you notice how it changes the fire immediately. The flames brighten slightly, the smoke thins, the heat sharpen. A lesser-known detail suggests that managing the hearth required experience and attention, as too much smoke could fill the longhouse while too little heat could leave the entire household vulnerable to the cold. It is not just about keeping the fire alive, it is about keeping it balanced. You watch the person tending it. Their movements are unhurried, familiar. They do not stare at the fire constantly, yet they always seem to know when something needs to be adjusted. It is a kind of quiet awareness built over time. So it's built. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of fire management was taught formally within families or absorbed gradually through daily observation and participation. Sitting here, it feels like something you would learn simply by being present long enough. You shift your hands closer to the flames. The heat is stronger here. It reaches into your fingers, easing the stiffness that the cold left behind. You turn your palms slightly, then your wrists, letting the warmth spread evenly. You begin to notice the layers of heat. Closest to the fire, it is intense. A few steps back, it softens. Further still, it fades into the cool air near the walls. This unevenness is not a flaw. It is expected. People move within it naturally. Someone steps closer to warm their hands, then moves away again to continue working. Another sits at a distance, comfortable in the gentler warmth. No one lingers too long in one place. The fire shapes movement. You glance upward. Smoke rises in a steady stream, drifting towards the openings in the roof. It does not leave immediately. It gathers first, forming a faint haze that hangs near the beams. Your eyes adjust to it slowly. The scent of smoke fills the air, not unpleasant, but present, constant. A curious detail recorded in some studies suggests that prolonged exposure to smoke inside longhouses may have had both protective and harmful effects, possibly helping preserve food and deter pests, while also affecting the health of those who live there. It is another balance, another trade-off. You watch as a pot hangs over the fire, suspended by a simple metal hook. The contents simmer quietly. Steam rises, carrying the smell of something hearty, something meant to sustain rather than impress. You realize that the fire is never doing just one thing. It warms the room, it cooks the food, it de-dries damp clothing, it provides light. It even helps maintain the structure of the space by keeping moisture at bay. It is not a single-purpose tool. It is a constant companion. You notice how often people interact with it. Not dramatically, not with all ceremony, but with small, frequent actions. Adding a piece of wood, shifting a log, stirring the pot, checking the heat. Each action takes only a moment, but together they keep everything steady. You begin to understand that the fire cannot be ignored for long. Left unattended, it could weaken, or grow too strong, or fill the room with smoke. It demands attention, but not all at once. Just enough, or often enough. You lean back slightly, watching the flames from a more relaxed position. There is something calming about their movement, predictable yet never identical, always changing yet always familiar. You can see why people gather here, why conversations happen here, why stories are told here. The fire gives more than heat, it creates a place. You glance at the people around you. Their faces are lit unevenly by the flickering light shadows shifting gently across their expressions. There is no urgency in their movements, no visible stress, just a steady pace that matches the fire itself. You notice how someone brings a small bundle of wood closer, placing it within easy reach. Prepared. Always prepared. Another person adjusts their position, turning slightly to warm one side of their body more evenly. Even rest is shaped by the fire. Historians still debate whether the central role of the hearth influenced the social structure of the household, creating a natural gathering point that reinforced shared responsibilities and communal living. As you sit here, it feels likely. Everything leads back to this place. You extend your hands once more, feeling the warmth settle deeper into your skin. The cold you carried in from outside is fading. Not completely, but enough. you begin to notice something as subtle. The fire does not eliminate the cold. It keeps it at a distance. It creates a space where life can continue despite it. You listen to the quiet crackle of the wood, the soft shift of embers, the occasional small pop as a log adjusts under the heat. These sounds blend with the low murmur of voices, forming a steady, almost soothing rhythm. You realize that this fire has likely been burning for hours, maybe longer, and it will continue long after you stop watching it. It is not temporary. It is continuous, maintained through the night, through the day, through the long stretch of winter. You shift slightly on the bench, settling into a more comfortable position. Your breathing slows again, matching the pace of the room. The fire continues to burn, unrushed, unwavering, and as you sit there watching its steady glow, you begin to understand that warmth here is not something that appears suddenly. It is something that is built moment by moment, maintained with care and shared by everyone who depends on it. The hearth does not belong to one person, it belongs to the household, and in return it holds them together. You sit there a while longer, letting the fire do its quiet work until you begin to notice something just as important as the flames themselves: what people wear. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking clothing was primarily made from wool and linen, with wool being especially valuable in cold climates because of its ability to retain heat even when damp. As you look more closely now, you begin to see that warmth does not begin at the fires. It begins at the skin. You shift your attention to the person nearest you, their hand still busy with a length of wool. The fabric looks thick, slightly coarse but flexible. It bends easily, holding shape without stiffness. Layered. Everything is layered. A base garment sits close to the body, likely linen, softer and more comfortable. Over it, heavier wool adds insulation, and in some cases you notice an outer layer that appears thicker, still possibly reinforced or doubled for added protection. You glance down at your own clothing, suddenly aware of how unprepared it feels in comparison. There is no single piece doing all the work. It is the combination that matters. A lesser-known detail suggests that Viking wool was often treated or woven in ways that improved its insulating qualities, including techniques that made it more resistant to wind and moisture. Standing here, you realize that these are not just clothes. They are tools. You watch as someone adjusts the edge of a sleeve, pulling it tighter around the wrist. A small action, but important. Cold finds openings. Every gap is a weakness. Historians still argue whether specialized winter clothing varies significantly across different Viking regions or remained relatively consistent due to shared knowledge and trade networks. As you observe the people around you, it feels like a shared understanding more than a rigid standard. Everyone dresses for the same purpose: to hold warmth close. You notice the use of fur, not everywhere, but in key places, around collars, at the edges of cloaks, lined inside heavier garments. The fur traps air, creating an additional layer that slows the loss of heat. You can almost imagine how it would feel, the softness against the skin, the subtle barrier it creates against the cold. A curious detail found in some accounts suggests that animal skins were sometimes worn with the fur facing inward for maximum insulation, though the exact methods likely varied depending on preference and availability. It is another reminder that practicality shapes every decision here. You watch as someone reaches for a cloak. They lift it over their shoulders in one smooth motion, fastening it with a simple brooch. The fabric falls heavily, wrapping around the body, covering the back and sides. It does not cling, it shields. You begin to understand that clothing here is not about appearance. It is about function. Movement remains possible. Work continues, but heat is never allowed to escape easily. You shift slightly, imagining the weight of such layers on your own body. It would feel heavier, more restrictive, and yet here it seems normal, expected, necessary. You notice how even the smallest details matter. Head coverings, simple caps or hoods that keep warmth from escaping through the scalp. Gloves or mittens, sometimes worn, sometimes tucked away when fine work is needed. Footwear, thick, practical, likely lined or padded, designed to keep out both cold and moisture. Your feet suddenly feel colder just thinking about it. You glance toward the doorway again, imagining stepping out without these layers. It would not take long for the cold to make itself known. You look back at the people inside. Their movements are not hindered by what they wear. They have adapted to it. Their bodies know how to move within these layers, how to work, sit and rest without wasting energy. You begin to see a pattern. Warmth is not created in a single moment. It is built in stages. The house protects, the fire sustains, and clothing carries that warmth, with the individual allowing them to move through colder parts of the space without losing too much heat. You notice how someone closer to the wall pulls their cloak tighter around themselves. Further from the fire, slightly cooler. The adjustment is automatic, almost unconscious, a response learned through repetition. You realize that clothing also allows for flexibility. People can move between warmer and cooler areas without constant discomfort. They do not rely entirely on the fire. They carry part of the warmth with them. Historians still debate how much time and labor went into producing these garments, particularly the spinning and weaving of wool, which required significant effort and skill. As you watch the steady hands working nearby, it becomes clear that this is not a minor task. It is essential work, ongoing. Quiet! You follow the motion of the wool being handled, twisted, pulled, smoothed, prepared for weaving or repair. Each thread contributes to something larger, a garment, a layer, a barrier against the storm. You begin to appreciate how much of winter survival happens long before winter arrives. Clothing must be made, maintained, repaired. There is no excess here. If something wears thin, it is reinforced. If it tears, it is mended. Nothing is discarded without reason. A small, almost overlooked detail appears as you watch someone adjust their clothing near the fire. They hold a damp piece of fabric closer to the heat, turning it slowly, drying it. Moisture is the enemy. Even the best material loses its effectiveness when wet. You can see how careful they are not to bring it too close. Too much heat could damage it. Everything is balanced. Always. You lean back slightly, wrapping your arms loosely around yourself, almost instinctively mirroring the posture you see around you. Holding warmth in, protecting it, you begin to feel a quiet respect for these layers, for the knowledge behind them, for the time it takes to create something that might not be noticed when it works, but becomes painfully obvious when it fails. The fire continues to burn at the center of the room, but now you understand something more. The fire alone is not enough. Without these layers, without these materials, without this constant attention to detail, the warmth would not last. You glance once more at the people around you. Their clothing is not identical, but it follows the same principles. Layer, protect, preserve. And as you sit there watching the quiet rhythm of hands working wool and fabric, you begin to see how warmth in this place is not just something you feel. It is something you wear, something you carry with you, something that stays close even when you move away from the fire. And in a world where the cold never fully disappears, that closeness might be the difference between comfort and something far more difficult. You remain wrapped in that quiet awareness of clothing and warmth for a while, until your attention begins to drift towards something softer, lower, closer to where people eventually rest, where they sleep. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking families often slept along the raised side platforms inside longhouses, using simple bedding materials such as straw wool and animal skins to create insulation from the cold ground. As you glance towards those platforms now, you begin to see that rest here is not separate from survival. It's part of it. You rise slowly and walk toward one of their sleeping areas. The wood beneath your feet feels slightly warmer here than near the doorway, cooler than by the fire. It is a gentle middle ground chosen with intention. You reach the platform and sit carefully. It is firm, solid, but not uncomfortable. Layers of material rest on top of it, creating a surface that feels softer than it first appears. You press your hand down slightly, feeling the give beneath your palm. Straw, wool, fur, each layer adding something different. A lesser-known detail suggests that straw bedding was often replaced or refreshed periodically, not only for comfort, but also to reduce dampness and maintain insulation during the long winter months. It is not luxurious, but it is practical. You imagine lying here, not alone, but among others. Close, shared warmth becomes immediately understandable. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements in longhouses followed strict social hierarchies or remained more flexible depending on family structure and available space. As you look around, it feels like proximity matters more than status, especially when the cold presses in from every side. You notice how the sleeping spaces are arranged along the walls, further from the door, closer to the retained warmth of the building, away from drafts. Even rest is positioned carefully. You run your hand across one of the animal skins laid over the bedding. It feels soft, thick, warm to the touch. You can imagine how it would hold heat once someone settles beneath it, trapping warmth close to the body, preventing it from escaping into the cooler air of the room. A curious detail noted in some interpretations suggests that families may have slept partially clothed or fully clothed during winter nights, allowing them to retain body heat and respond quickly if the fire needed attention, or if something outside required their awareness. Sleep here is not complete separation from the world. It is lighter, more alert. You lean back slightly, resting against the wall behind the platform. The structure feels sturdy at your back, offering a sense of protection. The wall itself, thick and insulated, prevents the cold from seeping through too quickly. You notice how the air feels different here. Still, less movement. The warmth from the fire reaches this space, but more gently, more evenly. It lingers. You begin to understand that where you sleep matters just as much as how. You glance toward the center of the longhouse. The fire continues its steady burn. Even at night, it will not be allowed to fade completely. Someone will always be aware of it, always ready to tend it. You imagine the room in darkness, the fire reduced to glowing embers casting a low, steady light, shadows moving slowly across the beams, the quiet sound of breathing filling their spool. People resting close together, their shared warmth adding to the heat already held within the walls. You shift slightly, pulling your arms closer to your body again, mirroring the posture you imagine they would take while sleeping. Curled slightly, protected, holding warmth in, you begin to see how human presence itself becomes part of the system. Each person contributes heat. Each body adds to the overall warmth of the room. Alone it might not be enough. Together it becomes noticeable. Important. Historians still debate how much body heat contributed to the overall temperature of longhouses during winter nights, but many agree it likely played a meaningful role, especially in tightly enclosed spaces like this. You glance along the length of the platform. There is space for multiple people, not crowded, but close enough. You can imagine quiet conversations before sleep, soft voices, low laughter, then gradually pins. The kind that settles naturally, not forced. You notice small personal items near the bedding. A folded piece of clothing, a simple tool, something familiar kept within reach. Even in rest there is a sense of readiness. Nothing is far away. You shift your gaze back toward the doorway, though you remain seated. You do not need to see it to remember what lies beyond. The cold, the darkness, the long stretch of night. And yet here in this shared space something holds, not just warmth, but a sense of continuity, of safety in a quiet, practical way. You realize that sleep here is not about complete comfort. It is about enough comfort to recover, enough warmth to rest, enough closeness to endure the night. You lie back slowly just for a moment, letting your body settle against the layered bedding. The surface adjusts slightly beneath you, supporting, insulating. You can feel how the layers trap your heat almost immediately, holding it close rather than letting it disperse. It is subtle, but noticeable. You close your eyes briefly. The sounds of the longhouse continue around you. The fire, the movement, the quiet voices. Nothing stops completely. Life continues even as rest begins. You open your eyes again, sitting back up. You are not staying here. Not yet. But you understand it better now. You understand how something as simple as where and how you sleep becomes part of surviving winter. You stand slowly, stepping away from the platform. The warmth leaves you slightly as you move back toward the center, but not completely. It lingers. Just enough. You glance once more at the sleeping spaces along the walls. They are simple, unadorned, but carefully arranged. Everything in its place. Everything serving a purpose. And as you return to your seat near the fire, you begin to see how the night when it comes will not be something to fear in the same way it might feel outside. Inside it will be managed, structured, shared. A continuation of the same quiet rhythm you have been watching all along. Warmth held close, carefully, patiently, through the long hours until morning returns, however faint it may be. You ease yourself back onto the bench near the fire, still carrying that quiet understanding of rest with you, when another realization begins to settle in. Warmth does not only come from fire or fur, it comes from what you eat. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking diets during winter relied heavily on preserved foods such as dried fish, smoked meat, barley dairy products, and fermented drinks, all prepared months in advance to sustain both energy and body heat. As the smell from the pot over the hearth drifts towards you again, this truth becomes impossible to ignore. You watch as someone lifts the lid slightly. Steam escapes, slow, steady. The scent is rich, earthy, comforting in a way that reaches deeper than simple hunger. It feels like something your body recognizes as necessary. You shift closer without thinking. Not too close. Just enough. A lesser-known detail suggests that fermentation played an important role in Viking food storage, allowing certain foods to last longer through the winter while also adding nutritional value. It's not just about keeping food edible. It is about making it useful. You notice how carefully the food is handled. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. The pot is stirred slowly, the contents thick and consistent, not thin or watery. This is food designed to last, to sustain, to provide more than a brief moment of satisfaction. You realize something subtle. Eating here is not only about filling your stomach, it is about fueling warmth. Historians still argue whether the caloric intake of Viking families during winter was consistently sufficient or if periods of scarcity were more common than we assume. As you sit here watching the steady preparation, it feels like a careful balance. Enough if managed well, not much more. A bowl is passed to someone nearby. They hold it with both hands, not just for stability, but to feel the heat through the sides. You can almost sense it, the warmth, transferring from the food into the fingers, into the body. You imagine take a deep kibble, zip. The heat spreading through your chest. Not dramatic, but steady, like the fire itself. You notice how people eat. Not hurried, not distracted. There is a quiet focus to it, as if each bite matters. Because it does, food is limited. Every portion has been planned, prepared, stored. You glance toward the storage area, again remembering the bundles stacked carefully along the wall. Dried fish likely hanging or laid out to keep moisture away. Grain stored in sacks. Butter or cheese kept cool but protected. Each item representing work done long before winter arrived. A curious detail found in some studies suggests that butter was sometimes stored in containers and buried in cool ground to preserve it for long periods, creating a rich, energy-dense food that could be used sparingly throughout the colder months. You think about that for a moment. Food hidden beneath the earth waiting, prepared in advance for a time like this. You begin to understand how much of winter survival happens in the past, in the months before, in the quiet work of gathering, preserving, planning. You watch as someone breaks a piece of bread or grain-based food, handing part of it to another. Sharing. Measured. No excess. No waste. The act feels ordinary, but it carries weight. You realize that warmth from food is different from the warmth of fire. The fire warms your skin. The food warms from within. Slowly, sustaining you over time. You place your hands together, feeling the lingering heat from the hearth. And imagine how it would combine with the warmth of a full meal. Layer upon layer, just like clothing, just like the house. Everything adds together. You notice how no one eats alone. Even if they sit quietly, there is always someone nearby. The space around the fire remains the center, not just for heat, but for nourishment, physical and social. Historians still debate how communal meals influence social bonds within Viking households, but it seems clear that sharing food reinforced cooperation and mutual dependence, especially during the hardest months of the year. You watch as the pot is adjusted slightly over the fire, lowered, raised, controlling how quickly it cooks. Nothing is left unattended. Even something as simple as boiling food requires attention, awareness, timing. You begin to appreciate how much knowledge is embedded in these actions. When to stir, when to serve, how much to give, how much to keep. It is not written down, it is lived, passed from one person to another through observation and repetition. You inhale, slowly letting the scent of the food settle in your mind. It feels grounding, reassuring, a reminder that warmth can be created even in a place where cold dominates everything outside. You glance again at the people around you, their faces relaxed, focused, not distracted. There is no sense of abundance here, but there is no panic either, just careful management. Quiet understanding. You begin to see that food is not just a resource. It is a form of security. As long as it lasts, the household holds. As it diminishes, the tension would rise. Even if you do not see it now, you can imagine it. That slow awareness of supplies running lower, of winter stretching longer, of uncertainty creeping in. But for now the bowls are filled. The fire is steady. The room is warm enough. You lean back slightly, letting the moment settle. The combination of heat smell and quiet movement creates a sense of calm that feels almost unexpected given the world outside. You realize that this is how they endure, not by eliminating the cold, but by building layers of response to it. Shelter, fire, clothing, rest, and now food. Each one supporting the others, each one necessary. You bring your hands closer to your chest, almost as if holding that understanding in place. Warmth is not a single solution. It is a system. And here in this longhouse, you're beginning to see how that system works piece by piece, moment by moment through the long, unyielding winter. You remain near the fire, the quiet rhythm of eating and tending still settling around you when your attention begins to drift toward the far end of the longhouse. There is movement there. Subtle, steady, not quite part of the human rhythm you have been watching. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in many Viking longhouses, livestock such as sheep, goats, and sometimes cattle were kept under the same roof as the family, during winter helping to protect the animals, while also contributing to the warmth of the space. As you look more closely now, you begin to understand why. You stand slowly and walk toward that end of the building. The air changes slightly as you move, warmer in a different way, heavier, carrying the scent of animals, hay and earth. Not unpleasant, but distinct. You slow your steps, allowing your eyes to adjust to the dimmer light. Shapes begin to take form. A sheep shifts slightly, its wool thick and dense, almost blending into the shadows. A goat moves its head, the soft sound of breath visible in the cooler air near the ground. They are calm, quiet, present. A lesser-known detail suggests that animals were often housed inside not only for warmth, but also for protection against theft and harsh weather, making them an integral part of the household's winter strategy rather than separate from it. You stop a short distance away observing. The animals are not treated as distant or separate. They are part of the same enclosed world. Their presence changes the space. You can feel it. A faint rise in temperature, a steady release of body heat. Small on its own, but noticeable when combined. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of animals inside longhouses was primarily driven by necessity, or if it also reflected a broader cultural acceptance of shared living space between humans and livestock. Standing here, it feels like necessity-shaped acceptance. You watch as someone moves closer to the animals, checking their condition. A hand runs along the side of a sheep, feeling its wool, its warmth. A quiet inspection, routine. These animals are not just companions, they are resources. Wool, milk, meat eventually. But in this moment, they are also something else. Sources of warmth. You notice how the space is arranged. The animals are kept at one end, slightly separated but not isolated. Enough distance to manage smell and movement, but close enough that their presence still contributes to the overall environment of the longhouse. Hay is laid out carefully, dry, clean enough, maintained. A curious detail found in some archaeological interpretations suggests that managing animal waste inside the longhouse required regular attention to prevent dampness and maintain air quality, adding another layer of daily labour to winter life. You can imagine that now, the constant effort, cleaning, adjusting, maintaining balance. Nothing is left unattended for long. You step a little closer, feeling the warmth more clearly now. It rises gently, mixing with the heat from the fire that reaches even this far, though more faintly. Layer upon layer. You begin to understand that even the animals contribute to the system, not intentionally, but inevitably. Their bodies produce heat. Their presence stabilizes the environment. You watch as one of them settles more comfortably into the hay, tucking itself, slightly conserving its own warmth. The movement feels familiar. You have seen similar gestures among the people, curling inward, holding heat close. The same principle, different forms. You realize that survival here is not limited to humans alone. The entire household, in a broader sense, includes these animals, each playing a role, each dependent on the others. You glance back toward the fire at the center of the longhouse. The distance between it and this end feels longer now, but not disconnected. Everything is linked. The warmth from the hearth reaches here. The warmth from the animals reaches back. The structure holds it all together. You notice how quiet this part of the longhouse is. Fewer voices, less movement. Just the soft sounds of animals shifting, breathing, settling. It adds another layer to the overall atmosphere. A kind of background presence. You stand there for a moment, letting the stillness settle. You think about how different this feels from modern ideas of separation, of clean divisions between living space and everything else. Here, separation is less important than function. What works? What helps? What keeps the cold at bay? Historians still debate how comfortable or difficult this arrangement would have been for those living in it, especially over long winters. But there is little doubt that it served a practical purpose. You take a slow breath. The air feels thicker here but warmer, grounded. You begin to appreciate how even this aspect of life contributes to the larger goal. Warmth is gathered from every possible source. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is ignored. You step back slightly, giving the animals space, and turn your attention once more toward the rest of the longhouse. The fire, the people, the steady rhythm of activity. You begin to see the full picture more clearly now. The house is not just walls and a roof. It is a system that includes everything within it. People, fire, food, clothing, rest. And now animals, each part adding something, each part supporting the others. You walk slowly back toward the center, feeling the shift in air once more as you move away from the animal end and closer to the hearth. The warmth sharpens slightly. The light grows brighter. The sounds return. You sit down again, settling into your place with a deeper understanding. Even something that might seem secondary at first glance is essential here. The animals are not an afterthought. They are part of the balance, part of the quiet effort to make this place livable through a season that offers very little on its own. You rest your hands near the fire once more, letting the heat reach you again. And as you do, you carry that awareness with you. Warmth does not come from a single source. It comes from everything working together. Even the quiet presence at the far end of the room, breathing softly, adding just a little more heat to a world that depends on every bit of it. You settle again near the hearth, the quiet presence of the animals now part of your awareness when your attention shifts to something more subtle. Not a single object, not a single task, but a rhythm. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that women in Viking households played a central role in managing daily life, especially during winter, overseeing food preparation, textile production, and the careful organization of resources. As you watch more closely now, you begin to see that much of what keeps this longhouse steady happens without drawing attention. It simply continues. Hands move over wool. Steady, measured. You follow the motion of one person working fibers between their fingers, twisting a lining, preparing thread. The movement is repetitive but not mechanical. Each motion adjusts slightly, responding to the texture, the tension, the needs of the material. A lesser-known detail suggests that spindle whorls, small weighted tools used in spinning, were among the most common items found in Viking archaeological sites, indicating how widespread and essential textile work was in daily life. You watch as the spindle turns, slowly at first, then more steadily. The wool stretches into thread, thin but strong, ready to be woven into something larger. You realize that warmth begins here too, long before winter, long before the fire. Historians still argue whether textile production was primarily a domestic activity carried out within individual households, or if there were more organized systems of production in certain communities. As you sit here, it feels deeply personal, close, continuous. You notice how this work happens alongside everything else. No separate space, no pause in other tasks. Someone spins wool while listening to conversation. Another checks the food. Another adjusts clothing near the fire. The actions overlap, interweave. Nothing stands alone. You begin to understand that this rhythm is what holds the household together. Not a single leader directing everything, but a shared flow of activity. You glance toward the storage area again. Cloth is folded carefully. Repaired garments are placed within reach. Nothing is left unfinished if it can be helped. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that well-made textiles were highly valued in Viking society. sometimes even used as a form of trade or wealth, reflecting the time and skill required to produce them. You think about that for a moment. Clothing not just as protection, but as value, as something worth time, effort, care. You watch as someone examines a piece of fabric, running their fingers along a worn edge. They pause, then begin to mend it. Thread pulled through carefully, each stitch small, precise, restoring strength, preventing loss. You realize how important maintenance is. Nothing is allowed to fail if it can be repaired. Every layer of warmth must be preserved. You shift slightly, listening more closely to the sounds around you. The soft whir of the spindle, the quiet murmur of voices, the gentle movement of fabric. It all blends into a steady, calming rhythm. You begin to feel it, that sense of continuity, of work that does not stop but also does not rush. It simply continues. Historians still debate how knowledge of these tasks was passed down, whether through direct teaching or through observation and participation from a young age. Watching now, it feels like something learned by being present, by doing, by repeating. You notice how even small actions are purposeful. Someone folds cloth near the fire, letting it warm slightly before setting it aside. Another checks a garment for dampness, holding it briefly closer to the heat. Adjusted, maintained. You begin to see that this work is not separate from survival. It is survival. Without these threads, without these repairs, without this constant attention, the system would weaken, gradually. Quietly, you glance at the people around you again. There is no sense of burden in their movements, no visible frustration, just familiarity. This is what must be done, so it is done. You lean forward slightly, resting your hands together, letting the warmth from the fire settle into them again. You think about how easy it is to overlook this kind of work, because it does not destroy attention. It does not stand out, and yet it supports everything else. The fire depends on clothing to hold its warmth. The bed depends on textiles to insulate. Even food preparation relies on cloth for storage, handling, protection. Everything connects. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that the keys to household storage chests were often carried by women, symbolizing their role in managing resources and maintaining order within the home. You imagine that now, not as authority in a dramatic sense, but as responsibility, as trust, as continuity. You watch as someone pauses their work, briefly glancing toward the fire, then toward the stored food, then back to their task. Always aware, always connected to the larger whole. You begin to understand that this rhythm is what makes the long winter possible. Not just strength, not just endurance, but consistency. Small actions repeated over time, without interruption, without neglect. You shift your posture slightly, feeling more settled now, more attuned to the pace of the room. The fire continues to burn. The animals remain quiet. The food simmers gently. And through it all, this steady, almost invisible work continues, thread by thread, task by task, holding everything together. You realize that warmth here is not only something you feel, it is something that is created, maintained and protected through countless small efforts, most of which happen without recognition. And as you sit there watching the spindle turn and the fabric take shape, you begin to see how survival in this place is built not on grand moments, but on quiet, continuous care. Continuous care. You sit quietly still, following the soft rhythm of spinning and mending, when your attention shifts again, this time towards smaller movements. Lighter, less deliberate. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that children in Viking-age households were expected to contribute to daily tasks from a young age, learning practical skills that would eventually become essential for survival. As you look more closely now, you begin to notice them, not at the center, but never far from it. A child moves near the edge of the firelight, watching closely as an older hand tends the pot. Their posture is careful, observant, as if trying to understand not just what is being done, but how. You notice how they do not interrupt. They wait. Learning begins with watching. A lesser-known detail suggests that toys found in Viking archaeological sites, such as small wooden figures or simple carved objects, indicate that children did play even within environments shaped by work and survival. As you glance toward the side of the room, you spot something small near the bedding. A carved piece of wood. Rough. Simple, but clearly shaped by intention. You imagine the hands that made it, and the hands that used it. You watch as one child picks it up, turning it slowly, then setting it down again, as if remembering something else they are meant to do. Play exists here, but it does not drift far from responsibility. Historians still argue whether childhood in Viking societies allowed for extended periods of carefree play or if it was more quickly shaped by the demands of daily life. From what you see now, it feels balanced. Not harsh, but not separate from reality. You notice how a younger child sits closer to the warmth of the fire, wrapped in layers that seem slightly oversized, perhaps passed down, perhaps adjusted over time. They shift slightly, pulling the fabric closer around themselves. Instinctively, already learning how to hold warmth in, you realize, that even without instruction the environment teaches. Cold encourages awareness, warmth rewards it. You watch as another child is handed something small, a piece of cloth. They examine it unsure at first, then begin to mimic the movements they have seen attempting to fold or hold it in a similar way. The result is not perfect, but it is enough to begin. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that children may have been gradually introduced to tasks such as spinning carrying water or tending small animals, allowing them to build skills over time rather than all at once. You can see that happening now. Small steps, small responsibilities, nothing overwhelming, but consistent. You shift your gaze slightly following their movements as they move between warmer and cooler areas of the longhouse. They learn quickly, where it feels best to sit, when to move closer to the fire, when to pull their clothing tighter. These are not lessons spoken aloud. They are felt, repeated, understood. Historians still debate how formal education may have existed in Viking societies, but much of what children learned likely came from observation, imitation, and participation in daily life. You notice how the adults do not constantly correct. They allow space. Watching, letting mistakes remain small and manageable, you begin to understand that learning here is woven into everything. Not separate, not scheduled. It happens as life happens. You hear a soft sound, a quiet laugh, brief, light. It passes quickly, but it changes the atmosphere for a moment. Add something softer, warmer in a different way. You realize that emotional warmth matters too. Even here, especially here, you watch as one child moves closer to another, sitting beside them, sharing the space without speaking, just being near, sharing warmth, sharing presence. It feels natural, unforced. You glance toward the fire again. The light flickers gently across their faces, softening the edges of the room, making everything feel slightly closer, slightly more contained. Safer? You begin to see how childhood adapts to this environment, not resisting it, but shaping itself around it, learning to exist within it, to find small spaces for play, small moments of rest, within a world that requires constant awareness. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that stories and oral traditions may have played an important role in teaching children value, skills, and cultural identity often shared during quiet moments near the hearth. You imagine that now, the same fire, the same space, voices telling stories that carry meaning beneath their surface, lessons hidden within memory. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth of the fire once more in your hands. You realize that children here are not separate from the system of survival. They are part of it, learning it, absorbing it, preparing to continue it. You watch as one of them glances toward the door, only briefly, then back to the fire. There is curiosity, but also understanding. The outside world is not inviting right now. It is something to be respected. Approached carefully, you lean back slightly, letting your gaze soften. The room continues its steady rhythm. Work, rest, learning, all happening at once. You begin to feel how this environment shapes not just actions, but awareness. From an early age, from the smallest movements, you understand now that survival here is not something suddenly learned in adulthood. It begins here, in small hands, in quiet observation, in repeated actions that slowly become instinct. And as you sit there watching the children move within the warmth of the longhouse, you begin to see how the future of this household is already being prepared not through grand instruction but through the steady, patient rhythm of daily life. You remain seated, watching the quiet movement of the children fade back into the larger rhythm of the room when your attention shifts once more. This time to the shape of the day itself. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that daily life during Viking winters followed a reduced but steady routine shaped by limited daylight and the constant need to manage warmth, food, and shelter. As you sit here, you begin to notice that time does not pass in clear segments. It flows, slowly, almost gently. You glance toward the doorway again. The light beyond it has not changed much. Still pale, still distant. The sun, if it is there at all, offers little guidance. A lesser known detail suggests that in the far northern regions, winter daylight could be reduced to only a few hours or even less, creating a sense of prolonged twilight that shaped both activity and perception of time. You can feel that now. There is no urgency to begin, no clear signal to end. The day exists as a continuation of what came before. You watch as someone rises from their place near the fire, moving toward the storage area. A task begins, quietly, without announcement. Historians still argue whether Viking households followed structured daily schedules or adapted more fluidly to conditions, but here it feels like a rhythm rather than a plan. Tasks emerge as needed, not forced, not delayed. You notice how movement is careful, measured, every step considered, not out of fear, but out of efficiency. Energy matters. You see it in the way someone lifts a container holding it close to their body rather than away conserving heat. You see it in how paths are followed inside the longhouse, not wandering but direct. Even indoors there is an awareness of effort. You imagine stepping out and the contrast sharpens in your mind. Cold air pressing in, snow underfoot, wind cutting across open ground. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that paths between buildings or key areas were often maintained carefully during winter, sometimes marked or compacted to prevent disorientation during storms or low visibility. You picture that now, a narrow path, used again and cleaned again, kept clear, essential. You notice someone preparing to move toward the doorway. They pause, adjust their clothing, pull a cloak tighter, check their footing. Then only then do they move, nothing rushed, everything deliberate. You feel the subtle tension of that moment, the awareness that stepping outside is not casual. It is a decision. You watch as the door opens briefly. Cold air enters, sharp, immediate. It brushes across your face even from where you sit. Then the door closes again, quickly. The warmth settles back into place, though not completely unchanged. A reminder. The outside is always there, waiting. You notice how the person who stepped out is already being accounted for. Not directly, but through quiet awareness. Someone glances toward the door, then back to their task. No alarm, just attention. You begin to understand that the day here is not defined by hours. It is defined by needs. Food must be prepared. Fire must be maintained. Clothing must be cared for. Animals must be checked. Each task arises, is handled, then fades. You shift slightly, adjusting your own position as if responding to the same rhythm. You bring your hands closer to the fire again, not because you are cold, but because it feels right. You notice how often people return to the hearth, not always for long, just enough to restore warmth before moving again. The fire becomes a point of return. Again and again, historians still debate how people perceive time in environments with limited daylight, whether it felt slower, longer, or simply different from what we experience today. As you sit here, it feels expanded. Not empty, just stretched. You listen to the sounds of the longhouse, the fire, the soft movements, the quiet voices. There is no sudden change, no clear transition from one part of the day to another. Everything blends. One task flows into the next. You begin to feel how this affects your own sense of time. You are not waiting for something. You are simply present, following the rhythm. A curious observation noted in some studies suggests that maintaining routine during long winters may have helped support mental resilience, providing structure even when external cues like daylight were limited. You can see that now. The routine is not rigid, but it is reliable. It gives shape to the day. You watch as someone returns from outside. They move quickly to the fire, hands extended, breathing slightly heavier. The cold lingers on them, clinging. You can almost feel it. They warm themselves slowly, not rushing, allowing the heat to return naturally. The room adjusts around them, making space, then settling again. You realize that every movement, every task is connected to the same goal. Maintain warmth, preserve energy. Continue. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. Your breathing slows again, matching the pace of the room. The day continues, without announcement, without interruption. You begin to understand that this is how time passes here, not in hours, but in actions, in small repeated efforts that carry the household from one moment to the next. And as you sit there watching the steady flow of movement around you, you begin to feel how this rhythm, quiet and unbroken, becomes its own form of warmth, holding everything together through the long, dim stretch of winter. You remain within that slow, steady rhythm, your sense of time now softened when something shifts slightly in the air, a different kind of warmth, not from the hearth, not from food, but from steam. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking people placed notable importance on cleanliness compared to many other medieval societies with regular washing practices and the use of steam baths helping maintain both hygiene and comfort. As you notice the subtle change around you, you begin to see that warmth can also be created through water, heated, contained, released. You watch as a container is moved closer to the fire. Water inside it begins to stir, not boiling yet, but warming, slowly. A lesser-known detail suggests that some Viking households or communities used small enclosed spaces or simple bath structures where heated stones were used to produce steam, creating an early form of what we might recognize as a sauna. You imagine that now. A smaller room, dark, filled with heat that wraps around you differently than firelight. Not sharp, but surrounding. You notice in someone dipping a cloth into the warm water, then wringing it out carefully. The steam rises gently as the cloth is lifted. They bring it to their hands, to their face, pressing it lightly, not just for a cleanliness, but for warmth. You can almost feel it, that brief, deep heat that reaches beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether such bathing practices were consistent across all Viking communities or varied depending on location and resources, but there is little doubt that the idea of washing was not ignored. You watch as another person repeats the process. Water, cloth, steam, a similar cycle, yet it changes the atmosphere. The air feels softer, less dry, more alive. You begin to understand that warmth is not only something you absorb, it is something you experience in different forms. Dry heat from film, moist heat from water, each affecting the body in its own way. A curious detail found in some accounts suggests that Vikings were sometimes described by outsiders as unusually clean for their time, even maintaining grooming habits such as combing hair regularly, which might have seemed surprising in such a harsh environment. You glance around now, noticing small objects that might have gone unnoticed before. A comb, simple, functional. A cloth folded neatly. These are not luxuries. They are part of maintaining order, even here. Especially here, you watch as someone warms their hands over the steam rather than the fire. The effect is different, less intense, but more enveloping. The warmth spreads across the skin in a softer way. You imagine how this would feel after time spent outside, after cold that settles deep into muscles and joints. This kind of heat would reach places the fire cannot. You shift slightly, becoming more aware of your own body, the dryness of your hands, the lingering chill in certain places. You can see how this practice would help, not just physically, but mentally. A moment of care, of attention. Historians still debate how much these practices contributed to overall health during winter months, but it seems likely that they played a role in maintaining comfort and preventing certain conditions linked to cold and dampness. You watch as water is poured carefully from one container to another. Nothing spilled, nothing wasted. Even water must be managed, heated with effort, used with purpose. You begin to see that cleanliness here is not about appearance alone. It is about function, removing dirt that could irritate skin, warming the body, maintaining a sense of normalcy. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that weekly bathing rituals may have been common in certain areas, sometimes tied to specific days, creating a regular pattern within the broader flow of life. You imagine that now. A dozen years at a time. A pause in the not to stop work completely, but to shift focus, to restore. You listen to the soft sounds of water moving, the gentle release of steam, the quiet exhale as someone presses warmth against their skin. It adds another layer to the atmosphere, another rhythm within the larger one. You realize that even in a place defined by cold, there are moments like this. Small, intentional, restorative. You glance again at the fire, still burning, still steady. Steady. But now it is not the only source of comfort. The warmth of water, the softness of steam, the act of care itself, all contribute. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax further. The room feels different now. Not warmer exactly, but more balanced, as if another element has been added to the system. You begin to understand that survival here is not only about enduring the cold, it is about creating moments that counter it, in different ways, through different means. You watch as the cloth is set aside, the water left to cool slowly, the steam fades, but its effect lingers, just like the warmth from the fire, just like the comfort of food. Each one temporary, yet meaningful. You bring your hands closer to the fire again, feeling the familiar heat return. But now you carry that awareness with you. Warmth can come from many places, and each one in its own quiet way helps make this long winter more bearable. You remain in that softened atmosphere where warmth now comes from more than one place when a quieter awareness begins to settle over the room. Not visible at first, but present. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that winter in the Viking world brought increased risk of illness as cold conditions, limited fresh food, and close living quarters could allow sickness to spread more easily. As you sit there, you begin to notice the small signs. Subtle, easy to miss. A cough, soft, brief. Someone shifts slightly, pulling their clothing closer, not out of habit this time, but out of need. You watch more carefully now. The rhythm of the room continues, but there are slight variations within it. Someone moves a little slower, another pauses longer than before. These are not dramatic changes, but they are there. A lesser-known detail suggests that Viking remedies often relied on a combination of herbal knowledge, practical care and belief, using plant salves and simple treatments passed down through generations. You notice a small bundle being unwrapped near the fire. Inside dried leaves, carefully stored. Someone crushes them gently, releasing a faint scent into the air. It mixes with the smoke. Subtle, almost calming. Historians still argue whether these remedies were consistently effective or if their benefits were as much psychological as physical, but in a place like this, even small relief would matter. You watch as a small amount is added to warm water, stirred, prepared, then offered to someone seated nearby. They take it slowly, carefully. You can see the intention behind the act. Not rushed, not careless. This is attention, care. You realize that illness here is not treated as something separate from daily life. It becomes part of it, managed, watched. You notice how the person receiving the drink is positioned slightly closer to the fire. Not dramatically, but enough. A small adjustment, made quietly. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that certain herbs used in northern regions may have had mild antiseptic or soothing properties, though exact uses and effectiveness are still not fully understood. You take in the scent again. Earthy, warm. It lingers in the air, blending into the environment rather than standing apart from it. You begin to understand that care here is not specialized. It is integrated. Everyone watches. Everyone adjusts. If someone needs more warmth, they are moved closer to it. If someone needs rest space is made, without discussion, without interruption. The rhythm adapts. Historians still debate how communities understood the causes of illness, whether through observation of symptoms or through beliefs tied to unseen forces, but regardless of explanation, the response was practical. You watch as a cloth is warmed near the fire, then brought over, placed gently, held. The heat from it seeps slowly into the body. Not a cure, but comfort. You can see how much that matters. You shift slightly, becoming aware of your own body again. How it reacts to cold, how it responds to warmth. You imagine how easily that balance could shift. How quickly comfort could become discomfort. You notice how the space feels slightly more attentive now. Not tense, but aware. Movements remain steady, but eyes linger just a little longer. Checking, observing. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that strong social bonds within small communities may have played a significant role in supporting individuals through illness, providing care that went beyond physical treatment. You can feel that here, not through words, but through presence. No one is left alone. Even if no one speaks, you glance again at the fire. It continues its steady burn, unchanged. Reliable, a constant in a moment that feels slightly less certain. You begin to see how important that is. The fire does not adjust. It remains steady, providing a foundation while everything else adapts around it. You watch as the person who coughed earlier settles more comfortably, their posture easing slightly. The warmth, the drink, the attention. Small things, but together they help. Historians still argue how severe winter illness might have been in different regions and periods, but it is clear that vulnerability was always present. You sit quietly, letting that awareness settle. Survival here is not guaranteed. It is maintained. Carefully, day by day, moment by moment. You notice how the room does not stop. Work continues. Food is prepared. Clothing is tended. But everything adjusts just enough to accommodate the need. Balance. Always balance. You bring your hands closer to the fire once more, feeling its warmth steady and familiar. You realize that health here is not a fixed state. It shifts, changes, and must be supported constantly. Through warmth, through food, through care. You glance around the longhouse again. Nothing looks dramatically different, and yet you understand more now. You understand that beneath the calm surface there is always attention, always awareness of what could change, what could weaken. And as you sit there listening to the quiet sounds of breathing movement and fire, you begin to see that surviving winter is not just about staying warm. It is about staying well enough, long enough to see the cold pass. You sit with that quiet awareness for a while, noticing how the room has adjusted without ever fully changing when something softer begins to rise beneath it all. Not work, not necessity, but something else. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that storytelling and oral tradition played a central role in Viking culture, preserving history, beliefs, and shared identity through spoken word, especially during long winter nights. As the fire settles into a lower, steadier glow, you begin to feel that shift. The room does not grow silent, but it grows quieter. Voices lower, movement slow. Someone settles closer to the hearth, not for warmth, alone, but for presence. You notice how attention gathers, not sharply but gradually, like heat spreading through the room. A lesser-known detail suggests that much of what we know about Viking myths and history comes from stories passed down orally long before they were ever written, shaped and reshaped by each telling. You imagine that. Now, words carried through time change slightly with each voice. You hear the beginning of a story, not announced, not formal, just a voice steady and calm, rising slightly above the others. You cannot catch every word, but you feel the cadence, the rhythm. It is not rushed. It moves at the same pace as everything else here. Slow, measured, intentional. Historians still argue how accurately these stories reflected real events versus symbolic meaning, but their role in shaping understanding and memory is undeniable. You watch as the faces around the fire shift subtly. Attention turning, bodies leaning just slightly closer. Even those who continue working seem to listen. The spindle still turns, the cloth still moves, but the story flows alongside it. You realize that this is another form of warmth, not physical, but something that fills the space. You hear a soft reaction from someone nearby, a quiet breath, a small sound of recognition or surprise. The story is familiar, yet still engaging. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that certain stories may have been told specifically during winter months when time indoors allowed for longer, more detailed narratives to unfold. You can feel that now. There is space for it, time for it. The darkness outside makes the room feel more contained, more focused. You begin to notice how the firelight interacts with the storytelling. Shadows move along the walls, shapes shift gently. It adds something to the experience, a subtle sense of depth. You lean slightly forward, not to hear more clearly, but simply to be closer to the moment. you begin to understand how these stories serve more than one purpose. They pass time, they teach, they connect, they remind. Historians still debate whether storytelling was primarily a form of entertainment or a method of preserving cultural values and knowledge, but it likely served both roles at once. You watch as one of the children listens more intently now, their earlier restlessness replaced by stillness. Learning, not through instruction, but through narrative. You realize that stories carry warmth in a different way. They fill the space that might otherwise feel empty during long nights. They give shape to time. You notice how the voice telling the story does not rise dramatically. It remains calm, even matching the tone of the room. There is no need for exaggeration. The setting does the work. The fire, the shadows, the shared attention. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that oral storytelling traditions often relied on repetition and familiar structures, making it easier for listeners to remember and pass on what they heard. You can sense that pattern. Certain phrases return, certain rhythms repeat. It feels grounding, predictable in a comfort way. You shift slightly, resting your hands together again. The warmth from the fire continues to reach you, but now it is accompanied by something else. A sense of connection, not just to the people here, but to something larger. You realize that in a world where winter limits movement, where darkness stretches, long stories allow the mind to travel, to move beyond the walls, to revisit the past, to imagine what lies ahead. Historians still argue how much variation existed between different regions and storytellers, but it is clear that these narratives were not fixed. They lived, changed, adapted, just like everything else here. You listen as the story continues, its pace unbroken, its tone steady. No rush to finish. No need to hurry. Time allows it. The room allows it. You glance around once more. The fire burns low but steady. The people remain close. The animals quiet at the far end. Everything feels connected. Layered. You begin to see how this moment fits into the larger pattern of survival. Not through effort, but through presence, through shared experience, through something that eases the weight of long nights. You lean back slightly, letting the sound of the voice blend with the crackle of the fire. The two become almost indistinguishable, part of the same rhythm. You realize that warmth here is not only built through physical means, it's also created through moments like this. Quiet, shared, steady, and as the story continues flowing gently through the longhouse, you begin to feel how even the longest winter nights can be carried not just by fire and food, but by the simple act of sitting together and listening. You sit within that gentle flow of story and firelight, the quiet warmth of shared attention still lingering, when something deeper begins to settle beneath it, not spoken directly. But felt. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking belief systems rooted in Norse mythology shaped how people understood the world around them, including the harsh realities of winter, which could be seen as both a natural force and something tied to the actions of gods and unseen powers. As the fire flickers softly, you begin to sense that warmth here is not only physical or social, it is also spiritual. You notice small details that might have been easy to overlook before. A carved symbol near a beam, a small object placed carefully near the hearth. Not decorative, intentional. A lesser-known detail suggests that people in the Viking world sometimes use small amulets or charms worn or kept nearby, believed to offer protection or good fortune, especially during uncertain times like long winters. You watch as someone adjusts one of these objects slightly, not with urgency, but with care, as if maintaining its place. Historians still argue whether such items were deeply believed to hold power or served more as cultural expressions of hope and identity, but here in this moment the distinction feels less important. The act itself carries meaning. You glance toward the fire again. Its steady presence feels almost symbolic now. Reliable, unchanging, a point of focus in a world that is otherwise unpredictable. You begin to understand how belief might settle into a space like this. Quietly, without disruption. You hear a shift in the tone of the story being told, not louder, not dramatic, but different. The words seem to carry weight beyond the moment, references to forces larger than the people in the room, to events beyond their control. You do not need to understand every detail to feel it. The sense of scale, of something vaster. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that winter itself could be associated with mythological events such as the idea of a great prolonged winter, appearing in Norse beliefs, reflecting both real experiences and symbolic meaning. You consider that for a moment, how lived experience and belief might blend, reinforcing each other. You watch as one of the listeners lowers their gaze slightly, their posture more still now, reflective. The story is no longer just entertainment. It carries something else. You begin to notice how the room responds, not dramatically, but subtly. The quiet deepens, the firelight feels softer. You realize that belief here is not something separate from daily life. It exists within it, alongside it, interwoven with everything else. Historians still debate how much these beliefs directly influence daily decisions, but it is clear that they provided a framework for understanding uncertainty. You glance toward the doorway again, still closed, still holding back the cold. You imagine what it might feel like to face that darkness without any sense of meaning beyond it. Then you look back at the room, the fire, the people, the quiet symbols placed carefully within reach, and you begin to see how belief might offer something important. Not control, but perspective. You notice someone tracing a small shape into the surface of the wood beside them, absent-minded, or perhaps not. The gesture feels practiced, familiar. You wonder how many times such actions have been repeated, how many winters have passed with similar movements. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that ritual actions, even small ones, can provide a sense of stability and reassurance in uncertain environments, reinforcing a feeling of connection and continuity. You can feel that here. The room is not just warm, it is grounded, held together by more than physical means. You listen as the story continues, now touching on ideas of fate, of forces beyond human control. You do not need to believe it yourself to understand its role. It fills a space that might otherwise be occupied by fear. You shift slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The sense of tension you felt earlier, subtle as it was, begins to ease. Not because anything has changed outside, but because something inside has. You realize that belief in this setting works alongside everything else. The house protects the body, the fire warms it, the food sustains it, the clothing preserves it, and belief steadies the mind. Historians still argue how uniform these beliefs were across different communities, but their presence is unmistakable. You glance again at the small object near the hearth. It remains where it was placed, unmoving, yet meaningful. You begin to understand that in a world where so much depends on preparation and effort, there are still elements that cannot be controlled. The length of winter, the severity of storms, the outcome of illness. And in those spaces, belief provides something else, a way to endure. You lean back slightly, letting the firelight settle across your vision. The story continues. The symbols remain. The room holds its quiet balance. And as you sit there, surrounded by warmth built from many sources, you begin to see how even the unseen, the unspoken, plays its part in carrying this household through the long, uncertain stretch of winter. You remain within that quiet, reflective atmosphere where story and belief have settled gently into the room when something begins to shift again. Not suddenly, but noticeably. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that midwinter feasts held special importance in Viking societies, marking key moments in the seasonal cycle and offering both nourishment and social cohesion during the darkest part of the year. As you sit near the hearth, you begin to sense that this moment is different from the steady rhythm you've been observing. There is a subtle lift in the air, a sense of anticipation. You notice it first in the movement. People begin to gather a little closer. Not crowded, but drawn inward. A lesser-known detail suggests that certain winter feasts may have included ritual elements tied to belief, food offerings, and shared customs that blended celebration with deeper meaning. You watch as additional food is brought forward. More than before. Not excessive, but more generous. The pot over the fire is adjusted. Another container is placed nearby. You can smell it now. Richer, stronger. something prepared with care. You realize that this is not an ordinary meal. It carries intention. Interporn. Historians still argue whether these feasts were strictly tied to specific calendar events or varied depending on local traditions and available resources, but their presence in winter life is clear. You notice how the arrangement of space changes slightly. People shift positions, making room, creating a loose circle around the fire. You feel it too, that subtle drawing together. You sit up a little straighter without realizing it, your attention sharpening. You watch as food is shared, passed from hand to hand, each portion given with care, measured, but slightly more abundant than before. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that feasting even in difficult conditions served as a way to reinforce social bonds and create a sense of continuity, reminding people that they were part of something larger than the immediate struggle. You can feel that now. The atmosphere is warmer, not just physically, but emotionally. Voices rise slightly, not loud, but more open. You hear a brief moment of laughter, soft, unforced. It lingers a little longer than usual. You notice how even those who had been quieter before seem more engaged now, listening, responding, sharing. You realize that this is a different kind of warmth, one that spreads through interaction, through shared experience. Historians still debate how often such gatherings occurred within individual households compared to larger communal settings, but even here within the single space the effect is clear. You watch as someone lifts a drink, simple but meaningful. They pause briefly before taking it, a small moment, but intentional. You imagine how such gestures might carry significance beyond the act itself. You begin to see how these moments break the monotony of winter, how they create markers within time, something to remember, something to look forward to. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth of the fire against your hands, but also something else. A sense of ease. The tension that lingers beneath daily survival softens, just a little. You notice how the food is eaten more slowly, savoured, not rushed. There is time for it. Time is already stretched. Now it holds this moment. You glance around the room, faces lit by firelight, expression softened. The steady work of earlier hours replaced for now by something lighter. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that communal meals and gatherings can have a measurable effect on morale even in challenging environments, reinforcing a sense of belonging and shared purpose. You can see that here. No one is alone in this moment, even if they sit quietly, even if they speak little. They are part of it. You notice how the fire itself seems to reflect the change. It burns a little brighter now. More wood has been added, more attention given. It supports the gathering, just as it supports everything. You begin to understand that these moments are not separate from survival. They are part of it. They provide something that cannot be stored like food or cloth, something that must be created, shared, experienced. Historians still argue how deeply ritual and celebration were intertwined during such feasts, but it is clear that meaning extended beyond the physical. You watch as the conversation continues flowing gently, without structure, without urgency. Stories return. Laughter rises and fades. Silence settles again, but now it feels different. Full. Content. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle more deeply into you. You realize that even in a season defined by limitation, there is space for this. For gathering. For sharing. For reminding each other that they are not facing the winter alone. You glance once more at the fire, still steady, still central, but now surrounded by something more. Connection. You begin to see how this moment fits into the larger pattern. Not every day, not constant, but necessary. A pause, a gathering of energy before the rhythm resumes. And as you sit there within the quiet glow of the hearth and the soft murmur of voices, you begin to feel how even the darkest part of winter can hold moments of warmth that go beyond survival, reaching into something deeper. You remain within that softened warmth of shared food and quiet voices when your attention begins to drift outward again. Beyond the walls, beyond the fire, a widely accepted historical understanding tells us that despite the dangers of winter, Vikings did not completely stop travelling during the colder months though. Journeys became more limited, more cautious, and often necessary rather than optional. As you sit there, you begin to imagine what it means to step outside now, not for a short moment, but for distance. For purpose, you watch as someone prepares near the doorway once more. This time with even more intention. Layers are adjusted carefully. Cloak secured, boots checked, nothing's rushed. Every movement carries weight. A lesser-known detail suggests that winter travel sometimes relied on compacted snow paths or frozen waterways, which could make certain routes easier to cross, even as the cold introduced new risks. You picture that now, a frozen surface stretching outward, solid, uncertain. You rise slowly and move closer to the doorway, stopping just behind the person preparing to leave. You can feel the difference in the air already, a faint pull of cold slipping through the smallest gaps. Historians still argue whether winter travel was avoided whenever possible or accepted as a necessary part of life, particularly for trade communication or tending distant resources. From where you stand, it feels like necessity. No one would choose this lightly. The door opens. This time you are closer. The cold enters immediately. Sharp, clean, unforgiving. It touches your face, your hands, cutting through the warmth you have grown used to. You instinctively tense. Even from this distance, the person steps out. The door closes quickly behind them, but the cold lingers for a moment longer than before. You exhale slowly, letting your body adjust again as the warmth returns. You imagine being out there now. The ground firm beneath your feet, each step deliberate, snow shifting under weight, wind moving steadily across. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that travellers might have used simple tools like staffs or ropes to maintain direction in low visibility, especially during storms or heavy snowfall. You can see that. The need for guidance, for something to hold on to. You move back slightly, returning to your place near the fire, but your mind remains outside for a moment longer. You think about distance, about how far one might need to go, to another household, to a storage site, to check animals or supplies. Every journey carries risk, exposure, fatigue. You realize that warmth carried within clothing and food becomes essential in these moments. The fire cannot follow. The house cannot protect. Everything depends on what you bring with you. Historians still debate how frequently such journeys occurred in different regions, but it is clear that winter did not stop life entirely. It reshaped it. You watch as someone inside glances toward the door again, not with worry, but with awareness. They know someone is outside, facing the cold directly. You begin to understand how that knowledge sits quietly in the room, not spoken, but present. You listen to the wind for a moment, faint through the walls, but steady, unchanging. You imagine the person moving through it, head lowered, steps careful, breath visible in the air. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that experience played a crucial role in winter travel, as those familiar with the land could navigate conditions that would be dangerous for the unprepared. You can feel that difference between knowing and not knowing. You realize how much skill is required just to move safely through this environment. Not quickly, not easily, but effectively. You shift your hands closer to the fire again, feeling its warmth return more fully now. It feels different after imagining the cold outside, more valuable, more immediate. You begin to see how the longhouse is not just a place of rest. It is a point of return, a center. Journeys begin here and end here. You glance again at the door, still closed, still holding back the cold. Time passes, not measured, but felt. You notice how no one rushes to open it again. They wait, trusting that the person outside will return when their task is done. You realize that trust is part of survival too. Trust in skill, in preparation, in experience. Historians still argue how communities managed risk during winter travel, but it is clear that caution and knowledge were essential. You listen as the fire continues its steady burn, grounding you again in the present moment. The warmth, the light, the safety. You begin to feel how different these two worlds are. Inside and outside, connected, but separate. Separate. You shift slightly, settling deeper into your seat. The memory of the cold fades gradually, replaced by the steady comfort of the room. And as you sit there, you begin to understand that even when people must leave this place, must step into the cold and face it directly, everything they have learned inside these walls goes with them. Layered, carried, remembered. And when they return, bringing that cold back with them for a brief moment, the longhouse will receive them again, restoring what was lost, holding them once more within its carefully built warmth. You sit again in the steady warmth, the brief memory of the cold outside already softening, when something shifts in a quieter, heavier way. Not in the room itself, but in the feeling of it. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that not all winters were equal in the Viking world, with some seasons bringing harsher, cold, deeper snow and longer shortages that could strain even well-prepared households. As you sit there, you begin to sense what that might feel like. When enough is no longer quite enough. You notice it first in the food. The portions are still measured, still careful, but there is a slight change. Less abundance, more attention. A lesser-known detail suggests that during particularly difficult winters, communities might have relied more heavily on preserved foods that had already been stretched thin, forcing careful rationing over extended periods. You watch as someone pauses slightly before serving. A small hesitation, then a smaller portion than before. Barely noticeable, but real. Historians still argue how often severe shortages occurred versus more stable winters, but there is little doubt that uncertainty was always present. You feel it now, not panic, but awareness. You glance towards the storage area again. The bundles remain, but you imagine them slowly diminishing. Each day, each meal, the supply changes. You begin to understand how time feels different in a harder winter. Not just stretched, but weighted. Each decision matters more. You notice how the fire is managed even more carefully. Wood added with precision, nothing wasted. The flames remain steady, but you sense the attention behind them has sharpened. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that access to firewood could become a serious concern in harsh winters requiring careful planning and sometimes long journeys to gather more. You think about that. Cold outside, limited and steady, and still the need to leave. You watch as someone adjusts their clothing more tightly than before. Pulling layers closer, holding warmth in. Even inside the cold feels closer, not entering, but pressing. You begin to feel it too, not as a sharp chill, but as a quiet presence at the edges of comfort. Historians still debate how communities adapted to particularly severe winters, whether through increased cooperation, migration, or simply enduring until conditions improved. You can imagine all of those, none of them easy. You notice how movement slows slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. Energy is conserved. Tasks are still completed, but with greater care. No unnecessary effort. You listen to the sounds of the room. Still steady, still calm, but quieter, more focused. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that periods of scarcity can heighten awareness within a group, leading to more careful management of resources and stronger attention to shared needs. You can feel that now. The room feels more connected, not through celebration, but through understanding. You watch as someone checks the stored food again, rearranging, counting, estimating, not visibly, but mentally. You realize that much of this awareness happens without words. No one announces concern. No one explains. It is simply understood. You glance toward the animals at the far end. They remain calm, but you wonder how they fit into this. How their care must also be balanced with limited resources. Every part of the household is affected. You shift slightly, bringing your hands closer to the fire again. The warmth is still there. But now you feel its importance more deeply, more urgently. You realize that in a harsher winter, the margin becomes smaller, less room for error, less room for waste. Historians still argue how often such extreme conditions led to loss, but it is clear that not every winter ended easily. You sit quietly, letting that awareness settle. It does not overwhelm. But it remains, a steady pressure. You notice how the people around you continue their work. Spinning, cooking, tending. Nothing stops, because it cannot. The system must continue. Even when it is strained, you begin to see how resilience is not about strength alone. It is about consistency. Maintaining the same actions, even when conditions worsen. You watch as someone adds another small piece of wood to the fire. Not large, not excessive. Just enough. Always just enough. You realize how much depends on that balance. Too much use, and resources fade fast. Too little, and warmth fades. Everything must be measured. You lean back slightly, letting your breathing match the slower pace of the room. You feel the weight of the season now, not just its cold, but its length, its uncertainty, and yet the longhouse remains. Holding, containing, supporting. You look around once more. The fire, the people, the quiet work. Nothing has changed dramatically, and yet everything feels more fragile. More precious. You begin to understand that surviving winter is not only about preparation. It is about enduring when preparation is tested. When conditions push beyond what is comfortable, you bring your hands together again, holding them close to the heat. The warmth remains reliable, and as you sit there aware now of how easily that balance could shift, you begin to see how each day that passes in this environment is not just another day. It is a success, a continuation, a quiet victory against a season that offers no guarantees. You sit with that heavy awareness for a while, feeling how the room continues despite it when your attention begins to widen beyond this single longhouse, beyond this single family. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking communities relied not only on individual households, but also on networks of kinship and neighbouring farms, where cooperation and exchange could provide support during difficult winters. As you sit near the fire, you begin to imagine those connections stretching outward, invisible, but present. You picture another longhouse not far from here, smoke rising, fire burning, people moving within their own rhythm. A lesser-known detail suggests that items such as food, textiles, or tools could be exchanged between households, especially when one family had surplus and another faced shortage, helping balance resources across a small community. You can see that now. A quiet exchange, not constant, but meaningful. You watch as someone near the storage area lifts a small bundle, examines it, then sets it aside, almost as if considering its use beyond this space. Historians still argue how formal or informal these systems of exchange were, whether governed by obligation, social expectation, or simple necessity. From what you sense, it feels like a mixture of all three. You notice how the idea of giving and receiving fits into everything you have already seen. Nothing here is wasted, but not everything is kept. There is room for sharing, when possible. You imagine a visit, a knock at the door, the brief rush of cold as it opens. Someone stepping inside carrying news, perhaps. Something to trade, perhaps nothing more than presents. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that hospitality held an important place in Viking culture, with hosts expected to offer food and shelter to visitors even during challenging times. You think about that. Offering warmth, even when it is limited. You begin to understand how that might strengthen connections. You watch as someone glances toward the door again, not in expectation this time, but in awareness. The outside world is not empty. It holds others who face the same winter. You realize that no household exists completely alone. Even if distance separates them, even if travel is difficult, there are threads connecting them. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth of the fire steady against your hands. You imagine those connections as another layer of protection, not immediate, not constant, but present. Historians still debate how often families relied on others during winter versus remaining largely self-sufficient, but it is clear that cooperation could make a difference when conditions became severe. You picture a time when supplies run low in one household, a decision made to seek help, to offer something in return, not guaranteed, but possible. You begin to see how trust plays a role here too. Trust built over time, through repeated interactions, through shared experience. You watch as the people around you continue their work, unaware of your thoughts, yet fully part of this larger system. Their actions do not change, but their place within the network becomes clearer. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that strong social ties in small communities could improve chances of survival during difficult seasons, providing both material support and emotional reassurance. You can feel that idea settling in. Even here, within these walls, the knowledge that others exist beyond them matters. You glance once more toward the animals, towards the stored food, toward the fire, all contained, all managed, and yet not entirely isolated. You begin to understand that resilience is not only built within a household, it is also built between them. You imagine messages carried through winter. Simple, direct news of condition, of need, of availability. You realize how valuable even small information would be, knowing that another family has enough, or does not. Historians still argue how communication was maintained during harsh winters, but it is clear that people adapted using whatever means were available to stay connected. You listen to the quiet sounds of the room again, the steady rhythm, the familiar pattern. Nothing here suggests urgency. Urgency. And yet beneath it there is awareness of a larger world. You shift slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The warmth holds you. The fire continues. The people remain steady. You begin to feel how this household is both complete and part of something greater. A single point within a wider network, each point holding, each contributing. And as you sit there surrounded by carefully built warmth, you begin to see how survival in this long winter is not only about what happens inside these walls, but also about the quiet, often unseen connections that extend beyond them, linking one household to another in a shared effort to endure. You sit quietly holding that sense of connection in your mind when your attention begins to turn inward again. Not toward the tasks, not toward the structure, but toward something more difficult to name. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that long periods of darkness during northern winters could have significant effects on mood and perception, shaping how people experience time, energy, and emotional balance. As you remain near the fire, you begin to feel what that might mean. The room is steady, the warmth is present, and yet there is a weight to the season that cannot be fully removed. You glance toward the doorway, still closed, still holding back the cold, but also holding back the light. A lesser-known detail suggests that in some northern regions the sun might rise only briefly or remain low on the horizon, creating a prolonged dimness that affects not only visibility, but the rhythm of daily life. You can feel that now, even without stepping outside. The light inside the longhouse comes mostly from the fire. Soft, flickering, constant, but limited. You realize how different this is from a world filled with steady daylight. Time feels slower, more fluid. Historians still argue how people in these environments adapted psychologically to extended darkness, whether through routine social interaction or cultural practices that provided structure and meaning. You begin to see all of those elements here. The routine, the shared moments, the steady work, all creating a sense of movement through time. You notice how people remain active, not overly so. But enough. Tasks continue. Hands remain busy. Movement persists. It prevents stillness from becoming something heavier. You shift slightly, adjusting your position near the fire. The warmth feels grounding. You begin to understand how important that is. A stable point, something that does not change. You listen to the sounds of the room, familiar now, reassuring. The fire, the quiet voices, the soft movements, they create continuity. You realize that continuity helps carry the mind forward. Through hours that might otherwise feel long and uncertain, a curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that marking small changes in the environment, such as slightly longer daylight or subtle shifts in weather, may have helped people maintain a sense of progress through the winter. You imagine that now, watching for change, even the smallest, a slightly brighter sky, a different quality of light. You begin to understand how hope might exist in such details. Not dramatic, but steady. You glance toward the people around you. Their expressions remain calm, focused. There is no visible frustration, no restlessness, but there is a quiet patience, a willingness to continue. Historians still debate how much emotional strain these conditions created, but it is clear that adaptation was necessary. You watch as someone pauses, briefly looking toward the fire without doing anything else. A moment of stillness. Then they return to their task. The pause does not linger. It does not deepen. It passes. You begin to see how balance is maintained. Work, rest, interaction, each preventing the others from becoming too dominant. You shift your hands closer to the fire again, feeling the warmth spread slowly into your fingers. The sensation is familiar now, comforting, You realize that physical warmth may also help steady the mind, providing a sense of security, of presence. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that maintaining social connection and shared routines can help reduce the psychological effects of isolation and darkness. You can feel that here. No one is alone, even in silence. You glance once more toward the doorway. Still closed, but you imagine what lies beyond. The long stretch of winter, unchanging, and yet not endless. You begin to understand that part of enduring this season is holding on to that idea, that it will pass. Eventually, historians still argue how people perceive the passage of winter, whether it felt endless or simply part of a known cycle. But here it feels like something to be carried through. Not rushed, not resisted. You lean back slightly, letting your breathing slow again. The room holds you. The fire steadies you. The rhythm continues. You begin to feel how the weight of the season does not disappear, but it becomes manageable. Through routine, through connection, through small, consistent moments of warmth, you look around once more. The longhouse remains as it has been, stable, quiet, enduring. And as you sit there aware now of both the physical and emotional layers of this long winter, you begin to see how survival is not only about staying warm in body, but also about maintaining a steady mind one moment at a time until the first signs of light begin to return. You remain seated, your breathing slow, your thoughts quieter now, and something begins to shift again. Not inside the longhouse at first, but beyond it. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that as winter gradually gave way to early spring in Scandinavia, subtle environmental changes signaled the return of light, slightly warmer temperatures and the beginning of a new seasonal cycle. As you sit near the fire, you begin to sense those changes before you see them. The air feels different, not warmer exactly, but less heavy. You glance toward the doorway, still closed, and yet something beyond it has changed. A lesser-known detail suggests that even small increases in daylight, sometimes just minutes at a time, would have been noticeable to those living through long winters, offering quiet reassurance that the season was beginning to shift. You can feel that now, not as a clear difference, but as a subtle easing. Historians still argue how quickly people would have perceived and responded to these changes, but it seems likely that awareness came gradually through observation and familiarity. You watch as someone near the fire pauses, slightly glancing towards the door for just a moment longer than before, then returning to their task. Nothing dramatic, but something is different. You notice how the fire continues to burn, still necessary, still central, but no longer the only source of reassurance. There is something else now, a sense of change. You rise slowly and walk toward the doorway. This time when you reach it, you pause. Your hand rests lightly against the wood. You open it. The cold is still there, but it feels softer, less sharp. The light outside is faint but clearer than before. The sky holds a tone that suggests something new. Not full daylight, but a hint of it. You step just outside for a moment. The ground remains cold beneath your feet. The air still carries winter, but you notice something. A difference in the way the light touches the land. A slight shift in colour, in clarity. A curious detail found in some interpretations suggests that the gradual melting of snow and the return of certain sounds such as distant water movement or early bird activity would have marked the transition towards spring. You listen. At first nothing, then faintly something different. Not loud, but present. You stand there for a moment, letting the air move around you. It is still cold, but it no longer feels endless. You turn and step back into your closing the door behind you. The warmth of the longhouse meets you again. Familiar, steady, but now it feels connected to something beyond the walls, not isolated, linked to the world outside. Historians still debate how people mark the transition between seasons, whether through formal recognition or simple awareness, but it is clear that this shift held meaning. You return to your place near the fire, sitting down slowly. You look around the room. Everything remains as it has been. The fire, the people, the quiet rhythm of work and rest. And yet something has changed. The weight you felt before has eased, not disappeared, but lifted slightly. You realize that this is how winter ends, not all at once, not in a single home, but gradually, through small changes. You watch as someone adjusts their position. no longer pulling their clothing quite as tightly as before. Another moves a little further from the fire. Small signs, subtle shifts. You begin to understand how important this moment is. Not dramatic, but meaningful. A transition, a continuation. You lean back slightly, letting your body relax more fully now. The warmth of the fire remains, but it feels less like protection, more like comfort. A curious observation noted in some research suggests that the psychological relief of increasing daylight may have been just as important as the physical changes in temperature, helping people regain energy and motivation after long periods of darkness. You can feel that now, a quiet lightness. You glance once more toward the doorway, still closed, but no longer holding back something unchanging. Instead, it separates two parts of the same cycle, winter and what comes after. Historians still argue how predictable seasonal changes were perceived in different regions, but here the pattern feels clear. Endurance, then release. You sit quietly, letting that understanding settle. You think about everything you have seen: the house, the fire, the clothing, the food, the animals, the work, the care, the stories, the belief. Each part building toward this moment, each part making it possible. You realize that surviving winter is not about defeating it. It is about lasting long enough to see it change. You bring your hands together once more, not out of necessity now, but out of habit. The warmth is still there, but it feels gentler. You close your eyes briefly. The sounds of the longhouse continue. Steady, familiar, safe. And as you rest there at the quiet edge of winter and the beginning of something new, you allow the room to hold you just a little longer. The fire flickers softly. The voices fade into a calm murmur. Your breathing slows. The weight of the season drifts further away, and for the first time you feel not just the effort of survival, but the quiet relief of having endured. The long winter loosens its grip. The light returns slowly but surely, and you remain here, warm, steady, carried gently forward with it. As the fire settles into a softer glow and the room quiets around you, you allow yourself to sink a little deeper into the warmth you've come to understand so well. There is no need to move now, no need to follow the popcorn to me. You have already felt it, learned it, carried it. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle crackle of the embers. Each sounds softer than before, each movement in the room fading into the background. The cold outside no longer presses against your thoughts. It remains where it belongs, beyond the walls, beyond your awareness. Inside, everything feels held. The warmth, the stillness, the quiet presence of others near you. You notice how the fire no longer demands attention. It simply exists, steady, reliable, like a distant heartbeat. The light it casts is softer now. Shadows barely see. The room feels smaller, closer, safer. You let your shoulders relax completely. The tension you carried earlier has faded without you noticing when, replaced by something calm, something steady and dark steady. You think briefly of the long winter you have just moved through, not as a series of challenges, but as a rhythm, a pattern of small actions, repeated, maintained, endured, and now gently released. Your thoughts slow, spacing out like the quiet gaps between breaths. You no longer follow each sound, each movement. You simply rest within them. The warmth remains, not strong, not sharp, but enough. Always enough. You feel it in your hands, in your chest, in the steady rise and fall of your breathing. And as the fire continues its quiet work and the room settles fully into stillness, you allow yourself to drift with it, carried by the same calm that has held this space through the longest nights, the same quiet warmth that made everything possible. And now, with nothing left to do, nothing left to prepare, rest, safe, warm, at ease, sweet dreams.